There it goes. Bam.
This is Dan Markert, Colonel, one each, retired on the Break It Down show. Ready to go. Pete Turner, what's going on, man?
I love it. I love it. Colonel when each retired. That's sort of your that's your sneaky way of saying, hey, I'm retired. I can talk pretty candidly about things. We're going to cover Afghanistan. I mean, I'm sorry. That's been the last 10 years. We're over Afghanistan now. Who cares? Nothing went wrong there. Nothing to see there.
Hey, Pete, let's talk about another country I've been to and helped work on U.S. national security strategy that I don't know, seems like it's not working out so well these days.
What country would that be?
I'm not sure I want to brag about my military record these days.
Yeah, no kidding, right? I mean, like here I am. I just spent the last hour before on this show talking about interpreter operations with an interpreter, and how advanced I am and all this stuff and how great I am at collecting for colonels and getting that information that they need to get shit right. And everywhere I've been to, we've lost badly.
Or yes, not done very well, or it doesn't look good now. We were winning when I was there.
We were winning. We were turning the corner over and over again.
There's a lot of similarities, I think, in some things. So what do we want to talk about in Ukraine?
Well, yeah, I mean, I guess that's the question is there's a lot to discuss. And, I want to stick with, here's the thing is, I know I can say this to you, but I'm saying this to the audience in particular. Dan and I can go on about opinions based upon experience, that kind of thing all day long. But Dan has specific experience in Ukraine. So I think we should try to stick in that zone there and let's try to be a little bit self-controlled on you and I both. And I have a hard time with this myself, but staying out of what I don't know. I'm not a middle European expert. I'm not an Eastern European expert. I know some things, but let's just stick with what we know and go from there.
Okay. Well, here's what I know. I've been there 4 times. First time was in 2003, shortly right around the Iraq invasion, when the regular Army European Command didn't have time to go visit Ukraine. So they asked the California National Guard to help out. And California still has a relationship with Ukraine as a state partner program. Of course, we had to evacuate our people out of the embassy and along with everyone else when this started to materialize. And then I went back again for a rapid Trident planning conference. And then the previous government, Yushchenko or whatever, things weren't going so well. So that exercise got canceled that year. And so planning for nothing, I guess. And then I went back again twice in 2014. I spent a week with the Ministry of Defense. And then a couple weeks later, I went back again for another week with the Ministry of Interior as part of the U.S.-Ukraine bilateral reset with the new Ukrainian government, right after the Maidan Revolution or the Orange Revolution, whatever they called it, put in a new, not so pro-Russian government, pro-Western government, right? So then it was like, okay, well, what can we do? What do the Ukrainians need? And what does the United States willing to do? What do we think? So I went there as part of that assessment. And that was 8 years ago. And there's been a lot of things that changed since. I've had friends and colleagues who were on assignment there much more recently from the California National Guard. In fact, one of them, he was our guy in the embassy, working on the state partnership program, and he and his family had to get evacuated. So the short version is, I thought they were a heavily conscript army, still like about 80% conscript, 20% contracted. So that's a lot of company level leadership that are, shaken big company commanders and first sergeants. And that showed when those units got sent to the east. They had a lot of problems operating outside the wire. So the Ukrainians were top notch at what I would call structured problem solving operations, right? Anything that was logistics in nature or fixed or urban, right? Urban combat has a lot of constraints, right? There's 4 sides to a building, right? There's a roof and there's understory. So there's only so many. In other words, there's a lot of things you can checklist and drill with conscripts, and they'll do very well at that. You start going out into the free form of, hey, here's this piece of terrain, and you got to go find the enemy. I don't know how, you got to go figure out how strong they are, and don't get killed while you're doing it, and then come up with a plan on how you're going to, neutralize or defeat or whatever the tactical task is. And they struggled with that in 2014. Now, we have a lot of evidence on social media and satellite imagery and photos of destroyed Russian columns that give us an indication that they seem to have solved that problem. And the feedback I had from my friends who were over there was, well, one of the ways they solved that was they rotated all their units. So, they conscript and build out their units and put them on a rotation schedule for, I forget how long, but months, right? 4 to 6 months in the Eastern Zone. They called it the ATO, the Anti-Terrorism Operations, against Donbass and Luhansk, against the separatists and whatever Russian forces were supporting them. So they had a lot of experience in 8 years on Russian-supported, equipped, conventional and unconventional operations. A lot of special operations, cross-border special operations forces, a lot of tech use. So the Ukrainians, I mean, the thing that me and my friends talk about a lot recently in the last week has been like, this is a modern country with like universities and lots of engineering degrees and the physical infrastructure of factories, right? We saw that with the breweries switching to like, hey, we're not making beer, we're making Molotov cocktails. So the ability of that society to mobilize its intellectual capital in this kind of in very much an existential crisis is significant, much more so than we would see in rural Afghanistan, right? I mean, like any repurposing factories. I mean, they had their own form of ingenuity, right? Everybody's, necessity is the mother of invention, and to survive against well-equipped and motivated adversaries, it's a Darwinian evolution of ingenuity. So I don't want to diminish, the adversaries that we faced in other parts of the world that weren't as advanced from an industrial capacity, but that's what the Ukrainians have. And I don't know. You got any questions?
Well,
on
I
that?
was going to ask
I ranted on.
no, but we got plenty to talk about here. This is easy. Basically, there are as many separatist movements as there are European countries. Azerbaijan has one. The United Kingdom
Sure.
has Cyprus. I mean,
Basque,
maybe the Basque.
Portugal, Spain,
There's
France.
there's a legitimate pretender to the throne in France. Like someone who's got a royal lineage who can, at some point, say, "Hey, I'm the boss, at least of this part of France." Like so, separatist movements are fairly common. Canada has a gigantic
Sure.
separatist movement, right? So when we look at this and we look at like helping Ukraine learn how to deal with its separatist movement, is that business we need to be involved in?
Do you mean
Like, should
Donetsk
we?
and Luhansk, the Russian separatists?
Yeah, like when you have separatists and you're sending people into the the terrorist zone, right? I mean, it's when are we overstepping that? Because we're certainly not doing that in Canada. We're not going up to Ottawa going, here's how you deal with separatists and everything else. We're not going to Calgary and well, maybe we are going to Calgary and creating ranges and weapon range and doing training, but not to deal with their separatists though, right? So when do we decide when we're going to like enable a country to deal with their separatist movement?
Well, in the spirit of staying in the lane of what do I know,
Yeah, yeah.
I'm going to have to go back to when I was there in 2014, and what was the point? Why were we doing a bilateral reset? Well, what we had was you had a foreign country, Russia, support a violent separatist group in Luhansk and Donetsk. So now it's an international issue where you have material support to ethnic Russians in those republics who are then trying to create their own independence violently. And then Russia also then just took Crimea. So you have a country that had two events that were foreign aggression on them, and they asked for our help. Right? And so the United States at the time, its national security policy was, hey, this is a violation of international norms. This doesn't comport with the Charter of the UN, and it doesn't meet our national security objectives on the European continent, where we're looking for a peaceful and prosperous European continent. And here we have a European power, Russia, a Eurasian power, that is violently against that. So it was in our national security interests at the time in 2014, and I don't know that it's really changed that much between now and then, that we would preserve a kind of peaceful and stable European order.
When
Because
you
Europeans have a long history of plunging the entire world into economic chaos and conflict when they're not stable and peaceful. So we've been there twice in the 20th century to fix that. So
yeah, when you look at the Ukrainians as a whole, you're there for a week or whatever it is. How much work can you get done? Like, what are you trying to do? Like, hey, Colonel, we're going to send you over to this place in this capacity, partnership, whatever it's going to be. What are you trying to do in that? And I'm not saying you can't do anything, but it is a short amount of time. I mean,
it was a very short amount of time. It's an absolutely fair question.
Yeah.
And I think, I think the audience, whoever's watching this, should have a little bit of an education in like, hey, how does the U.S. foreign policy and national security apparatus work? Well, one of the ways it works is it plucks a lieutenant colonel who's, part-time National Guard guy and says, hey, go to Ukraine and go meet with their general staff, like our equivalent of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, 3- and 4-star generals at the top level. Hey, go ask them what they need and see if you can figure it out and give us a report, and maybe we'll read your report. Probably not, and they'll just do whatever they want to do anyways. But, hey, we followed a process. We're going to report back to Congress that here's this report. We sent experts. They talked to experts. And here's what we want to do anyways. So it was a short period of time. And all I learned was what, those Ukrainians would tell me and what I could personally observe. And I got to observe I got to observe a couple things. I visited a couple units in the Kiev region and one of their training facilities for the National Guard, which is not like our National Guard, right? It's really Ministry of Interior troops. It's just a different version of the Army that reports to a different, minister who answers to the prime minister or the president, in this case from Ukraine. So it's not a lot, but the short version of my report was, hey, they're an advanced country. They have factories. We probably don't need to send them a lot of high-tech weapons. They wanted javelins back then, night vision and encrypted radios and drone stuff. They wanted all the cool boy toys that we were using at the time in Afghanistan and Iraq and later Syria and Somalia, and every other place we've been. But I didn't. To me, at the time, and I don't know that I would change it with the value of hindsight, was that what they really needed was they needed their training and personnel pipeline modernized. And I guess you could argue that, well, like, hey, do both. But from a prioritization standpoint, at the time, I wrote up in my report that we could help them a lot more by reducing the amount of casualties they suffered and making them more effective at the company and platoon level, particularly by helping them establish, a better training pipeline and better the higher, like Don Vandergrift, like, hey, outcomes based learning, that type, and having a personnel system that supports that.
Yeah.
That's what I thought they would have more value from than other than us just sending them stuff. Because I mean, they could build their own stuff.
Yeah.
But nobody listened to me, and they wanted.
That's
Because it's hey, like there's no
not
donations to congressional reelection campaigns for, like, I don't know, training programs or whatever. But like, if you're gonna ship $50 million worth of high tech weapons and equipment, well, hey, those are jobs in somebody's district.
I have someone did read your report, and they said they cut everything out, and they're like, needs high tech weapons.
Yeah, exactly. They deleted the part where it said, "I don't think they need it."
Right. No, I've seen. I mean, look, we have all seen this. You write enough reports, you're like, I wrote that sentence, but those are all the words in the sentence. It just conforms to what they wanted to say, right?
Like, hey, where's the rest of the paragraph?
Yeah. Where's my conclusion that says the exact opposite of that whole thing? Yeah. It happens all the time. I was actually, when you were talking about that, I was thinking about Powhatan Clark, who was a post-Civil War trooper out west, in the Apache Wars, and he got to go to Germany. I think it was Germany, or Europe in general. Maybe it was France. Germany. I think it was Germany, and he got to go see how their cavalry operated. And he wrote this what would have been a very forward-looking report. And then he came back and started writing about it in the press, and that kind of that made it soured everybody on him because he had gone outside of the normal chain. But let's be honest, no one was going to read Powhatan Clark, some lieutenant's report about the future of warfare that was on the doorstep. They just didn't know, and so It won't be last time. Or Les Grau, who wrote all about Afghanistan, and no one even had to read a Les Grau book before you deployed to Afghanistan. I mean, this happens over and over again.
Hey, here's something I thought about this morning as I was thinking about being on the Break It Down show, which was about, like, oh wow, here's all these photos and videos of Russian vehicles abandoned with no fuel and stuck in the mud or blown apart, entire convoys wiped out. Wow, they're not that good. And the estimates, some reports I read, were they've lost 10% of their combat power, right? They went in with 10 divisions and they've lost an entire division. Everybody thinks that, like, oh my gosh, that's horrible. I'm like, well, yeah, if the Americans had that happen to them in anything in the last 25, 30 years, it would have been all hell would have broken loose. However, anybody who's been in the military, who's done like the high level warfighter exercises at division and corps level, and you go do a Caspian Sea scenario, or you do the North Korean Peninsula, 30-40% losses. I mean, that's what happens in large scale combat operations. And I was thinking about this exercise I did in 2017, getting ready to go to Afghanistan. That had nothing to do with getting ready to go to Afghanistan because it was a Caspian Sea scenario, but that's what was on the training schedule for the unit. And so I was at this division level exercise that was, had a corps headquarters, and we were we had a British division working with us, and another U.S. Army division. So it's like a 3-division exercise going in there, and we probably, in a week's worth of simulated combat, we lost 30% of our combat power. We lost an entire mechanized infantry battalion in one battle. But on day 8, like, we encircled the opposing force and wiped them out, right? I mean, we had we were lucky in the beginning because we wiped out the reconnaissance battalion quickly. And so they didn't know where all our stuff was. And we got lucky with catching their attack helicopter regiment on the ground with an artillery strike. And we managed to get lucky hitting their, like, major headquarters with an airstrike with a special operations team that managed to find them. So I thought of that, and I thought, like, well, and I looked at this map, not yesterday, but the day before, that showed where the estimated Russian units were, and they're in the process of encircling Ukrainian resistance forces. So while it may look like, oh wow, yeah, the Russian army, what a mess! These guys, what, they can't do maintenance. Look at the cheap Chinese tires that are falling apart.
Mm-hmm.
We might find out, in another couple of days that, well, yeah, they took some casualties, but that's the nature of large scale combat operations, and they've encircled their opponents and laid siege to the capital, and it's, might be all over.
Yeah, I mean, who knows, right? I mean, how many times have you heard in the next 24 hours, in the next 48 hours, in the next 96 hours, in the next 100, you're like, you can't just keep making the number bigger and saying that's going to happen. But then again, yeah, you can, because that's the nature of this thing. One sniper round goes and kills a key leader on either side, and there's a significant degradation of that. I'm curious what your impression is. When you go to Iraq, when you go to Afghanistan, you don't see the kind of institutional trust that the American army has, as we'll go Don Vandergriff again here too. Like, we preach it. We're not great at doing it, but we're way better than the other countries at mission command and not having to, always wait for someone 4 ranks above you to tell you, yes, you actually can walk across this field and go seize the initiative, But in Russia, that is, and you saw that a lot in Iraq and Afghanistan, like absolutely exercising no initiative because it was dangerous to do so, right? And not just because of the enemy, but because internally. How far removed had the Ukrainians gotten away from that? Because they've got a long time of being, a Russian asset, and that was how they were taught, and their generals are still around from that era,
Sure, and there were a lot of experiences on rapid trident exercises where you would see that I didn't personally see it, but my friends who were there and came back, everybody's always swapping, their deployment stories, where, yeah, that's exactly what these guys did. They, it's just, they just do what they're told, and they do execute battle drills, and they're good at it. But if it doesn't fit, if the context doesn't fit the battle drill, a lot of times they don't know what to do. And it's really the culture of that, the organizational culture of that is a consequence of the training environment. I mean, it's not that they're human beings. So, I mean, they're ingenious. They can solve all kinds of problems. Given the opportunity, but in organizations like that, that's not what they train for. It's not what they spend their time on. It's not what gets rewarded. That's not who gets, moved up. I mean, you go do your own thing and you try and be creative, and a lot of times you get squashed, right? I mean, you're not rewarded for that. In fact, you're punished for it. I think those 8 years between 2014 and now, rotating units into the East and getting advice from not just the United States, but other European allies, Poland, Britain, the Israelis even sent people there, technical advisors on drones and electronic warfare stuff, if I recall correctly. So, and the feedback from one of my friends was, these guys were quick learners. Now, he was working with Ukrainian special operations forces. So they had the additional resources that you would expect special operations forces to have, and then access to NATO special operations exercises and cross training and getting to go to other people's courses. In fact, that was one of the things I learned when I was there in 2014, that they didn't. This was the Ukrainian National Guard, so they're like equivalent of a combination of our FBI hostage rescue team and Delta Force, right? So they had a special mission unit in the Ministry of Interior, but they didn't really have their own. I mean, they did unit training. They didn't have like a training pipeline. They did selection, and then they sent them to another country.
Mm-hmm.
They sent them to another NATO country to go through their special operator course. And when they finished that, then they came back. Yeah. So that's those type of things where you're getting a lot of exposure
Right.
from your Western European professional, military education system.
So
I
there's
think that
definitely a separation from the old Soviet days and model. It may not be perfect, but our model
they were
doesn't work.
hungry for it.
Yeah.
They were hungry for it. The first time I went there in 2003 was with the 95th Air Mobile Brigade, and the officers in that unit, maybe not so much the brigade commander, he was pretty political, but all the battalion commanders and the regimental staff and the battalion staff officers, everybody I interacted with on that training week, and that was all about NATO interoperable air mobile operations, right? Helicopter air assault operations, and they were just hungry for it, right? Hey, how do we operate? How do we get NATO interoperable? How do we move beyond what where we've been? And they recognized the the shortcomings of that that model of organization, right? Conscript army, authoritarian political officers appointed at each echelon. Don't deviate from the party rule, comrade. Your papers are not in order.
Right. So, given all of these things that we're talking about here, the ability of the Ukrainian army to want to get better, and I'm a big believer that affect beats effect in modern conflict, right? And we're seeing a lot of that right now, where they're fighting for the affect. We've got, and I keep using the example, but it's very, very illustrative of the problem. We've got a Russian lady who sings opera in New York City getting fired from her job because of the affect of our for Russia, right? And so we're seeing this battle for global attention, minds, hearts, all those things. And so it starts to take the effect part of it and really downgrade what, okay, I've taken 4 pictures of the same blown up tank from 4 different angles, put a filter in, and now it's 55 different incidents of a tank getting shot. There's so much misinformation. The effect part of this is even more degraded. Am I far off base on this? Or because I know the effect affect thing is kind of my thing, but I don't, it seems like Russia is losing badly on the affect side.
Yes, I think so. And it was a great surprise to me because I thought I was, I was influenced that like these guys are masters of it. And part of that was our own, the briefings I got, where we were, told by like, yep, this is here's the actors. They're from these 4 countries, and this is who his influence is, 70% from here and 40% from there. And here's what's going on and all that. And so, you get, okay, our guys are telling me that, by our guys, I mean, our intelligence agencies, law enforcement and military are saying like, here's the penetration that's happening in the information space on all these bots and information operations and, false accounts and all that kind of stuff and all this stoking all this, division and just sowing confusion wherever they can. And you got the feeling that like, oh, wow, these guys are way ahead of us and all this. And now, you look at what's happened, they go into Ukraine almost blind. You're like, what were those guys doing? What was the 217th Facebook battalion of the MVD doing?
Yeah. That was like back in the beginning of ISIS, the 82nd Airborne put on their Twitter account that they were having a brigade barbecue, And I'm like, you guys are way behind this information.
Oh, okay.
I mean, yeah, that's just the crazy thing. And this is another form of the French Foreign Legion, because you probably can hire a Russian dude to do anti-Russian ops because he's looking
for paycheck.
Yeah. $100,000 a month. No problem. I'll get you this many.
No problem. Did you see the news thing was showed up? I think it was yesterday, where the San Francisco tech company got caught sending contracted locals. Kind of, it's like Uber or GitHub, not GitHub, Grubhub. Except it's like, hey, go take a picture of this crop or road intersection so we can validate something for our government client. which you
Wow.
don't know anything about. You just get told like, hey, I'll pay you $50
Yeah.
or whatever the local currency is. And they go out there, and then it gets fed into the DARPA system to calibrate their satellites on, can I tell wheat from barley from space? And this guy gets, shooed away from a Ukrainian militia checkpoint or army checkpoint. They think
Yeah.
he's spying on them and collecting information. And it
Yeah.
turns out, oh yeah, he's collecting information. In fact, he's collecting information for DARPA to calibrate their satellites on telling the difference between crops. What
Yeah.
else are they doing?
Right. Spy, I says. And the next
Who
thing
else is contracted to go out there and take pictures of things and geo-reference, calibrate somebody's satellite or, provide that? That sounded fascinating. I was like, oh man, I wish I'd known about that company when I was in Afghanistan, because I was trying to solve a problem like that.
Yeah, no kidding. I used to do odd jobs for a tech company in San Francisco, and they kind of did that thing, but for like combines and tractors, and to help automate them, and
Yeah.
hyper accurate maps. And you could improve, improvement by 2% for a farmer is
Sure. It's a lot. That's
your
interesting. My father-in-law did something with that with Trimble navigation systems years ago.
Yeah.
Precision farming, they called it.
Right. Yeah, that's exactly what these guys did, is precision farming. And thankfully they bought a lot of TV monitors, and so I hung those on the wall, because that's all I was qualified to do when I came back from Afghanistan, was mount TVs on the wall. But you're right. There's a lot of that. This fight is true. We were talking recently about this, and how a billionaire can, like Elon Musk, can say, here's the internet. Ding, it turns on his internet system for anybody. So it's startups, it's Elon Musk, it's all these external entities. Do we end up with a modern version of the Zimmerman letter, where Russia's like, all right, enough of that. Now we're at war with you guys too, and whoever you guys is, because you can't control all these. So the U.S. can say, stop doing commerce with anything in this region, but you're not going to stop them, because a lot of them are unstoppable. By design, by the way, unstoppable.
Sure. Oh yeah, sure. I mean, that's the whole point of like Web 3.0 and the blockchain, right? Distributed, autonomous, can't shut it down. There is no centralized location, and there's no centralized people. It's autonomous, distributed and autonomous organization.
Right.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know how I'm going to stick to our promise of not venturing into what I don't know. And I have no idea what the Russian general staff would think about that, and what, certainly what Putin would think he needed to do. From a capabilities perspective of what I know that the Russians have capabilities to do, they have the capability to go after those digital assets or digital entities or digital capabilities, and they have the capability to go attempt to disrupt, deter, or neutralize those capabilities. And it's a question of like, to what extent do they want to do that, and how, and everybody runs into a capacity issue of like, okay, well, you can do that for so much, so many IP addresses per day, or whatever the measurement of effectiveness is, or the measurement of performance for those type of organizations are. They can only do so much. And my experience on the U.S. side was, you had to have the right intelligence, and you had to have the right value of target set in order to apply pretty advanced capabilities to target them, because it just the work wasn't worth the effort. I'm saying that doesn't make sense. The effort wasn't worth the target value. Like there was no way you were going to get that high value capability to go after and spend all this time. And mostly it was a function of time. The amount of time required to have that capability go get an effect it just wasn't worth it. It had to be somebody really important. And the Russians may find that they may find maybe that Starlink becomes that target. I don't know.
It's also hard in the middle of a fight, an actual shooting war, to have some brigade staffer do a diminishing return analysis, to help adjust your decision making where you're like, hey, this no longer makes a lot of sense. It's getting, exponentially more expensive because you're just too busy trying to fight and trying to survive. I can't imagine being
certainly at the brigade level, and certainly in a Russian brigade headquarters, which are probably
right.
about a third the size of ours.
Yeah.
I was always kind of jealous about, like, I'm like, those guys, they don't have a big staff.
Yeah. 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 We have, I mean, I know they don't do the things that we do, but we truly have section meetings that prepare you for the practice that the section has before they go to the staff meeting practice before the actual staff meeting takes place.
That's right. The meeting to get ready for the meeting, to be ready for the meeting.
Yeah. And then have a meeting afterwards because you're like, hey, we didn't get anything done in this meeting. But I mean, that right there, what I just described happens all the time.
Sure.
A lot of times, almost half of the people in that room have at least one master's, if not two, and a lot of them have PhDs. So it's a $1 million+ meeting every time these people ought to get together to maybe do a decision brief where they like get told to go back and do more work, right? Do the Russians have a similar problem here with this thing as they're encountering bad tires, bad hubs, bad weather? That's only going to get worse. How are they handling this as an institution, do you think?
I don't know. I mean, the stuff I've read and the experiences I've had in the U.S. Army is like it's hard to get people to do the boring, mundane things that that need to be done in order to be ready potentially for something that might happen in the future, right? And so, that or it's beyond personal discipline; it's organizational discipline, and can you get conscripts, especially right? How much? What's the percentage of conscripts versus professionals? Getting conscripts to do all that kind of stuff is even more difficult. I mean, I do recall from when 2 years ago I did my Air War College final project, which was a European scenario. That in that analysis, it is a weak spot, if you will, in the Russian army, which was their logistical organizations. I mean, their tactical formations, or especially when they task organize as battalion tactical groups, they're designed for lightning fast operations, short time periods. Right? They're not organized for lengthy, sustained ground operations, right? Because if you're doing that, with mechanized warfare, I mean, that's a huge logistical program for that. I mean, that all the big level exercises I did in the Army, I mean, like this one I was telling you about, the Caspian Sea scenario. I mean, there was a 2-star sustainment command headquarters that had their like nothing. They had their whole point of existence was to move personnel and material and replacement, tanks, major end items off of ships, and manage the port and get the stuff off the ships through the port to the rail lines to the truck lines, and so there's an entire 2-star headquarters focused on nothing but the logistical support for this major operation. And that was only right. That's a 3-division operation. The Russians got 10 divisions going into Ukraine, so that would be a significant logistical tail. And it appears from all the open source imagery and reports that there isn't some big logistical command that's expeditionary, right? They're operating from staging areas in Russia and Belarus, and so that they're relying. It appears, I don't have any inside information on this, but it appears they're relying on kind of their, we'll call it peacetime or institutional logistical infrastructure. And that probably explains some of their challenge, because they were like thinking like, hey, we're going to be surrounding Kiev in 72 hours. We'll seize the airfield. We'll have a division of paratroopers on the ground. And that didn't happen.
It did not happen. And every day these things don't happen, it gets harder and harder for it to happen. We're talking about sustainment commands, everything. There's probably someone with the star on their shoulder who's responsible for all the petroleum lubricants.
Sure,
And
multiple stars. Yeah. Right.
right. And there's probably 150 different things they buy and use to keep things spinning, and greases and oils and whatever. And
well, and how much do you bet? How much do you bet that they got the same problem we do, where somebody put together a spreadsheet and like a PowerPoint and told the boss what he wanted to hear?
Yeah. It's on order. It's on order. It's coming, or whatever. Right. I call the guy.
They reported at the rail yard they could handle 50 rail cars per 12-hour shift.
Right. So if you're the Ukrainians,
and then you didn't find out that you didn't know that, like, oh, they don't have a night shift, or the night shift can only handle half that, and you're like, oh,
yeah.
So
We shipped a car from Baghdad to Balad, and the car got to Balad, and then someone stole it. And now you're like, well, which one of these white pickup trucks is ours?
I don't know.
And then he's like, I would start with a notepad and just start writing down, and then it's like, oh my God. So that's the reality of these things, right? It's that hard. So you're trying to get lubricants. And if the Ukrainians know this, they're like, well, everybody knows the main lubricant factories are 1, 2, and 3. It might sound like an action movie, but you send a bunch of dudes over, you send a bunch of rockets over, and you go wacko that thing and give them another lubricant problem. And that's just lubricants. That's not even like lettuce and leather and rubber and all the other things that you have to acquire as an army to stay in the field the way they are right now. Whew, that's hard.
Yeah, I mean, you start doing the math, right? Maybe they had the logistics estimate worksheet, the LU.
Yeah. Yes, exactly.
Or those. Somebody's wishing they'd fill that thing out.
But this is real, though. I want to spend another minute on this. You go sit at a battalion, let's just say 1,000 people, right? And this is a unit that's designed to go out and smash things, but they consume a lot of things. The gear they use gets used up. And so if you sit at a battalion staff meeting for a battalion that's forward deployed, that commander is getting a brief every couple of days on how many sets of boots are coming in, because dudes are chewing up boots daily. And you go out and you see, and this is the American Army. You will see dudes with their feet popping out of their boots because they didn't happen to bring any size 16s on this pallet of boots. I mean,
sure.
Talking boots,
Yeah. American Army. How does the American Army have boot problems? Are you kidding me?
Right.
When does that ever happen? Well, it happens.
Yeah.
I've seen it happen.
Uniform
happen.
Yeah.
I was an infantry battalion S4, when I was a captain. And, one of the things I did was like take the SOP and then like build a spreadsheet so that, hey, does all this stuff add up? Like this is the basic load plan. And my eye popper to the battalion commander was like, hey, the mortar platoon SOP says that, this is their standard load and this is how. And I'm like, no, it's not, because I just calculated the weight of that many mortar rounds. And it'll break the axle in the Humvee. You can't, I know somebody probably did the cubic math, but they didn't do the weight math. And I'm like, it's only this. Trucks can only hold that much. Here's what your basic load is that you're going to have in the combat trains. And they were like, what? No, that's not enough. And I'm like, hey man, just do the math. And I found that a lot in the U.S. Army, where it's like, oh, we got to do the math. We got to actually add everything up. Not with logisticians, of course. Those guys are, math and spreadsheet geeks. But in the infantry world, there was a certain amount of resistance to that. That's what Longies do. Pogues do math.
Yeah.
I'm like, no, people who want to win do math.
Right. But it's a real thing, because then you look at every system, every piece of equipment, the materiel management. And I know, like, just from our own experience in Iraq, after, I don't know, 5 or 6 years, all of those Humvees, other than driving on a flat paved road, they were all blown out. They had no torque left. We had to literally, this is 100% true. We had to literally go out and put as many dudes as we could behind the Humvees to get them over a berm. And I'm not talking like a 10-foot berm. I mean, just a lump, like a 3-foot berm. And this is not meant to like stop Humvees. It just was a natural terrain feature. And we would have to go out and shove on it and get it over the top. And this is an American-made Humvee. And so if that's true, when you drive a bunch of vehicles, one, you want to stay on the improved roads as much as you can, because you go and start driving through fields and instantly stuff is going to start breaking. Instantly.
Oh, 100%. Totally remember that.
Yeah.
Like, and you got an infantry battalion with, 75, 80 vehicles in it. And day one, as soon as you turn on the engines and roll, like 2 of them break. Something happened. Like every day, something's breaking. Hose cracks, some electronic thing fries, tire goes flat.
Yeah.
I mean, and that's just driving it, let alone like, oh, hey, I bumped into something, or I ran off the road, or got scared because, a rocket came in and hit nearby. So like I drove it into a tree.
Anything.
Anything, let alone combat damage. So, I mean, you're immediately, day one, stuff's breaking, and you're having to have it, having the maintenance plan, right? What's the recovery plan?
Yeah.
Maintenance control point, cannibalize the parts, get the thing back into the fight. Go back to brigade support area.
It's
barter, just trade your vodka for new tank treads.
Yeah. And this is here's a 100% true story. When the 165th had my battalion, when we went to Bosnia, when we left Hungary, we drove into Bosnia, right? Because we were close at that point. And we had a wrecker with us that could tow a Humvee, and it had a Humvee behind it because, a Humvee broke. And then another Humvee broke, and it could only go like 15 miles an hour, and so our speed was 15 miles an hour. And that because we had to get down there. But imagine that, like what that does to the queue behind us. Yes, you might send some vehicles around. And if you haven't had this experience, yes, you can have an entire battalion pass another battalion on the road. Good luck, because shit's going to happen that you don't expect to happen. There's going to be a wreck. Someone's going to kill a cow. You have to stop because the farmer's got cows. I mean, all this shit really happens. And so you have the Russians in this environment. Sure, they may whack every cow they see, but there's all these variables that go into this that just make what is already a hard fight even harder.
Yeah, no, 100%. And then you get delayed. You're trying to fix something, and then you get ambushed.
Right. Or you have
get hit with a rocket artillery strike. I mean, then because that's the difference now that people are seeing is like, hey, here's a near peer fight going on. Right, both sides have air capabilities. Both sides have significant artillery capabilities. Both sides have tanks. Both sides have anti-tank, anti-missile, anti-aircraft capabilities. So, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of damage, and I think that's probably, for me, as an old retired guy now, is like, that's the main point is like, hey, like these things are bad and they cause a lot of damage. And it's why it would be in, the United States national security interests that we need to provide an off-ramp for Russia. Like, what can we do? I don't know, provide's probably not the right word, but, enable, support, an off-ramp. The Ukrainians are in an existential fight for their lives. So, of course, they're going to inflict as much damage as possible. Not sure what the Russian policy objectives are, turning Ukraine into rubble. It doesn't seem to, I guess we prevented, a Western-oriented, big country from developing on our border. Okay, but destroying it all, I'm not sure how that really supports your objectives, but those are their objectives, not mine. That's why I think, it's in our interest to like, what can we do to de-escalate? What can we do to off-ramp this thing? What can we do to, not with absent sacrificing the Ukrainian people and their sovereignty and freedom, like that's not what we're in for. But we should be trying to figure out how do we how do we de-escalate? How do we off ramp this? So some of the proposals that have come out where it's like, hey, we need, let's fly these Polish MiGs to Ukraine. Like they can, yeah, no, that's not a good idea. That's not a, it kind of negates a bunch of Article 5, defensive protocols there where you're like, hey, you're an active belligerent,
Right.
and that's unfortunately for Zelensky, he's like, hey, I want my no-fly zone. You guys are, humanitarian ne'er-do-wells if you don't establish a no-fly zone over Ukraine. I'd be like, well, we may as well just go to war with Russia then. If that's the case, let's just go invade Kaliningrad and let's just start the nukes now. I mean, no, that doesn't make sense. That's not where we want to go.
I saw a map the other day when they wiped Russia off the map, and I'm like, but you forgot Kaliningrad. Like that's a significant thing. It's like it can grow from there.
Well, it's a risk to NATO to have this huge militarized island right there, in Poland. However, it's also, something that, is at risk for the Russians, right? I mean, that's what there is a bit of, hold that hostage, perhaps.
Right. There also is the ability to use, because I have to imagine that escalation is still a likely thing in NATO, Title V, all still possible. And at some point, I mean, I don't know what role we play. I don't have confidence in the administration. I wouldn't have had confidence in the last administration, so everybody calm down. But these folks in particular have screwed up a lot in the last 20 years, the folks that are running the show for America. So
it's sad, right? Yeah. It's sad. Our elites have failed us in ways.
Yeah, and we could spend some time talking about that because it does matter, and their past poor performance does matter. I keep saying this, but it's going to continue. Just like Hillary Clinton had TS/SCI on her server, and it's not what about the emails, and it's like, hey, where was the examination of this security breach and what was the damage caused by it? We didn't even do that, right? So we're not taking things seriously, right? And when Secretary Austin has to say, I don't know how many Americans are in Afghanistan and I can't protect them, we have a problem when our Secretary of Defense can't say that. And so if they want to go get involved in something, I just don't trust that they have the capability to get it right. I don't think that's unfair because they've proven to be bad at this.
Yeah, we don't have a very good track record in the last 20 years.
Yeah. So when we do look at this, and we're trying off ramps, should we be the off ramp builder? Should we? And is it even? Would Putin take an off ramp right now?
I don't know how we don't be like. Well, like we're still a global superpower.
Yeah,
and we're kind of guarantor of last resort for NATO in Europe. So how do we not be part of that? How do we not take a leadership role in that?
Right.
That doesn't. It just, to me, that's abdication of leadership if we don't. There's probably a case to be made of using, an interlocutor like Britain or Poland or Sweden or Switzerland. I don't know. Pick somebody. There's probably a case to be made where some other player, they'd need to be significant though. It would need to be, Germany or France or Poland. France is it seems like they've been playing a bit of that role where they're one of the big three in Europe. And, we would be, hey, we would lend our credibility to that other power and say, hey, we're going to let them take lead. We're here for support. Like we don't want to, since they're volunteering, we want to enable them. And I forget what book or who the author was, but there's like, when you're the top dog in the order, like it's a way to both simultaneously demonstrate your kind of relative power status, and you can afford to kind of lend your, status, your great power status. You can lend it to other players, and there's a role for that in international relations and diplomacy, and it quite likely would be a good play in this scenario. But you could also easily see it as like, hey man, this might need to be a bilateral, like straight US Russia discussion on let's find the off ramp so this just doesn't go into crazy land.
Let's go a little further into crazy land just for a few, because one of the possible scenarios is that NATO or fill in the blank organization starts to say, all right, Russia, the longer you're here, the more we're going to drop munitions in your backyard. You guys aren't responding to the economic sanctions. You're not responding to McDonald's canceling you. Here comes a low-grade weapon to a low-grade airport, and we'll talk to you in 5 hours, and just it slowly ratchets up. Because ultimately, Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia have a population smaller than the population of Houston, right? At some point, there needs to be something that's going to push the Russians back, and I don't know if they're counting on something happening behind their heads, and then it's already got to be high pressure for Putin internally with the oligarchs losing money. And look, if the sanctions have hurt anybody, it's mom and pop, right? And they're the ones that are like, and it takes one person to say, I've lost everything. I've nothing left to lose. Let me save my country. And then they go and they do something horrible, and it changes the outcome even worse for Russia.
Yeah, it could. I don't know. I mean, to me, I think what's most likely is that there's some Russian military action against NATO supplies. So the supply chain of munitions into Ukraine gets interdicted. And if it gets interdicted on Polish or Hungarian or Romanian or whoever it is, Lithuanian, whoever's soil it is, that might be decision time. But I could see a scenario where we're like, we're not gonna honor Article 5. It's kind of a tit for tat. That's what you get when you play with fire. You get burned. Yeah, and we're not going to escalate.
Yeah.
Or the only escalation is going to be defensive measures that will inflict the cost on any of those type of actions. That would be my hope, that we don't go crazy and escalate. Because I don't know how you keep it contained by having NATO strike aircraft take out Russian bases in Belarus or Russian combat formations in Ukraine, knocking out Russian aircraft out of the sky. I don't know. I don't know how you keep that contained. So I don't see a rational, let alone U.S., but European national security objective in escalating is in being the one to escalate. Now it's different if it's coming into your door, you're going to defend yourself. The big unanswered question is like, how much self-defense are we doing?
Yeah. And also, the next time an American jet drops munitions on a former Soviet country will not be the first time in the last 40 years that that's happened. I mean, we picked a side in the Yugoslavian et al. Fight, and we absolutely flew sorties in and absolutely bombed the shit out of. And look, anybody who knows the history of that region, you pick a side and you just go with it, because you're not picking the right side. They're all the wrong choice.
Sure.
So
everybody's got their problems. I want to be respectful of time. I'm running out of time here myself. Man.
Yeah.
Job I got to do. But
yeah, I don't want to keep any longer than we got you. All right, let me wrap this thing up. Anything in closing?
I think in closing would be pray for peace, and take some kind of action to support the humanitarian relief for Ukrainians. And then my final thing would be, don't take cancel culture so far against individual Russian people who don't really live in Russia anymore, or it's like, hey, let's have some grace.
Russian salad dressing is still delicious. You can still have it.
Yeah.
All right. Stand by. I'm going to shut this thing down.
Hey, thanks for watching the show. I really appreciate it. Right here, you can subscribe. Please do that. It makes the show grow. Hit that notification bell so you know which incredible guest is coming up next. Down below is the PayPal link. You can put a small subscription in. That is an enormous help. All that money goes right back into the show. And then right up over here are the next episodes you should listen to, curated by yours truly.